Welcome into episode 328 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. And Bridget and Scott, I feel like we've been busier than we were probably in the last few months with everything going on around the league, with the draft and free agency approaching tomorrow. So it's an exciting time, and there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, I do actually appreciate that the NHL crams basically its entire offseason into 1 week, because it does free up the rest of the summer. Now, I wish it wasn't July 4th week, because
I was gonna say it's not great timing.
yeah, like there's literally a day of development camp on July 4th, so that's where I get to start the day. So I wish it was like maybe a different week, or even just a day or two.
But it's about where you end the day, Scott. Where are you going to end the day?
Right. Yeah. I still have to figure that out, actually, but it will not be at a hockey rink. It'll only start at a hockey rink.
Okay.
But yeah, it is. I think it's better than just like spacing things out. Like the NFL off season, it's like there's like set dates of like this week is this week's that, and because the NFL is just year long at this point. The NHL's like, we want to get everything done and then send everyone on summer vacation for 2 months, and we'll see you at training camp in September. So I actually do appreciate it. Yeah.
That's how I like my life. So, yeah, but the funny thing was everybody was in Vegas, right? Like for the draft. And the thing that was killing me yesterday was this trade horn was going off, and everybody was hungover as hell because they were out in the casinos gambling until who knows when the night before. And then the trade horns were going off, and they were loud. And oh my God, I'm sure people were really sick and tired of hearing that with massive headaches. And
yeah. And especially day 2 on Saturday, like especially those second and third rounds, there are a ton of trades.
Yep.
Some of them just picks, but a lot of players. A big one with Mikhail Sergachev that we'll get into at some point. But yeah, I saw Greg Wyshynski tweeted at one point. He was like, they should just keep the trade horn on and shut it off for the occasional draft pick.
Yeah. But it was like, is it really necessary? Could we just like flash a graphic? Like, I don't know. It was quite loud. That was probably not great for those who were, including I think some of the broadcasters who were out the night before playing craps or something. But anyway, we will get to our opening shifts because there's actually a lot more than just the draft to talk about today.
There is. I will start with the draft though, and I think that's probably where we'll start the pod. But got to start with the Bruins' first-round pick, their first-round pick in 3 years, and that's Dean Letourneau. Very big center, 6'7", listed at 6'6" somewhere. I think, Chris Peters told us he's like 6'6.5" or 3/4, so whatever. But heading to Boston College this fall, played in Canadian prep school this past season, which is not a traditional path for especially for a first-round pick in their draft year. Put up a ton of points there, but it's a lower level of competition compared to, say, the USHL or NCAA or Canadian Major Junior. But a pick that comes with a lot of upside. Going to require some patience. He's raw. It's going to be a big step up for him going to BC this year and playing NCAA. But it's more than just his size. He's a good skater. He has good hands. He has a really good shot. He can score. So, I think it's a pretty big swing by the Bruins. And I like the pick. That there were probably a couple other players I might have taken over him at that point, but not a lot. I don't think it was a reach at all. I saw some people who tried to make that point and were like, oh, he was projected in the second round. Chris Peters told us when he joined us for a preview that he thought he was going in the first. I saw a lot of mocks that had him going to the Rangers 30th. Apparently they were a team that had interest in him. So even if the Bruins didn't take him at 25, I don't think he was lasting too much longer. So
no, I saw him projected at like 27. I saw him project anywhere but in that range of 25 to 30. So like if you want to go, 2 picks down, like if he might be projected slightly like further down than guys that you might not have scouted too much or might not have had a whole lot of interest in as much as him. So, I like the pick too. We'll get more into that after opening shifts. So My opening shift also is draft related, but something I wasn't expecting that happened yesterday was that the Bruins, when they were about to make when they get to the fourth round and trying to decide who to take in the fourth round, they actually went on and traded Jakub Lauko in kind of a weird 4-piece trade where Minnesota and the Bruins swapped draft picks. The Bruins moved up to 110 in the fourth round and gave Minnesota the 122nd pick that they originally had. And then Lauko went to Minnesota, and Vinny Lettieri, who previously played, or was previously in the Bruins organization, comes back to Boston. I don't know your thoughts on Lauko being part of this, and also the fact that they moved up. They wanted that pick about, I think it's 12 spots ahead of where they originally were, because there was someone there that they wanted that was still on the board that I think they thought kind of fell to them, and they wanted to make that move and draft that player. So we'll get to in a little bit. We'll get to our thoughts on Lauko, replacing him, what the Bruins have in the bottom six, why Minnesota wanted him, and just if there's some little fun anecdotes about Lauko as well over the years.
That was the pick the Bruins used to take Elliot Grunwald. So that was, as Bridget mentioned, in the fourth round. It was the second pick they made because the Bruins did not have a second or third rounder.
Yeah.
So just switching gears quickly, the other part of the episode will be focused a lot on free agency, which is at this point less than 24 hours away. Well, actually, I should say it's noon on July 1st, right? So technically, it's about 23 hours away.
By the time the episode's posted, it'll probably be right around 24 hours.
Yeah, very true. Okay, so with that in mind, heading into Monday, the Bruins, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 teams in the NHL with more cap space than the Bruins heading into Monday. Carolina, Nashville, San Jose, Calgary, Chicago, Detroit, and Anaheim. I think of that list, obviously, Nashville's a good team. Detroit, they can pop, although they haven't been in the postseason in quite some time. But of that list, Carolina is the only team, in my opinion, on that list and in the league that's a cup contender or a cup hopeful that has more money to spend than the Bruins. So if Monday comes around and all these other teams that are hopefully trying to win a Stanley Cup because their roster is close enough at this point, pre-free agency, if they're addressing their team needs and they're outbidding the Bruins, there's I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but the Bruins have needs and they have more money than most other contenders. And so there's really not a ton of excuses if they're losing out on players that they want. And I understand the nature of free agency is every player is going to get overpaid for the most part. That's the nature of the business. So we're going to get into it, and there's a lot of people who have opinions on what to give what guy, what not to give a certain guy. And I just think everybody has to cope with the fact that if the Bruins want to add to this team, they're going to have to overpay. And just like every other team is going to have to overpay. So I just wanted to throw that out there for listeners who may not know. The Bruins have more cap space than almost every other team in the league that, at least last year, had cup aspirations.
Yeah, and the Bruins are probably losing less in terms of core players than some contenders are, because some of those teams aren't going to be able to keep all their own free agents. They, like Carolina has more cap space, yes. They also have a lot more guys who are hitting free agency. Like, they have a significant number of players from their roster who are free agents who have not been re-signed yet. So,
and the Bruins got to do Swayman too, right? So that plays into their.
Yeah. So true. I guess I'm thinking, UFAs, like players that we know the Bruins are going to keep Swayman. Obviously, the money matters, and that goes towards what they can spend. But like Tampa just traded away Sergachev, Tangino. They're potentially going to lose someone else. We'll see what happens with Stamkos. Florida is not going to be able to keep everyone. There's been rumors that they might trade away Ekblad. Montour is a free agent who could go elsewhere for Hagee. Like, there's all kinds of rumors around them and what they're going to be able to do. So the Bruins, Jake DeBrusk is the biggest one that they're going to lose. but we think there's going to be there better be at least one top 6 forward coming in. I think we all hope for 2, but we'll see if that happens, but certainly 1. And ideally, that's going to be someone who's more consistent and a higher impact player than DeBrusk.
Yeah. I mean, in the press conference, the pre-draft press conference, it seemed pretty unlikely DeBrusk was coming back, just based off what Sweeney was saying, and that conversations really hadn't progressed anywhere still, which, we're, like Brian said, 24 hours away from free agency. He's going to go there. He's probably not coming back to Boston. I know he was a polarizing player. Some people that we know, like our producer, Nico, love DeBrusk. So sorry for Nico if he doesn't come back, but yeah, I mean, there's an opportunity there when you're not spending what he wants. So his contract, he's gonna be asking for $5-6 million. You might be able to get someone that fits better. You might there's an exciting opportunity to add a forward that has a different skill set, different upside, rather than going after DeBrusk. If the interest isn't there on either side or one side or what have you. So do you guys want to go back, though, start with the draft stuff and then work our way towards talking about tomorrow? What's coming?
Sure. So it's probably worth it to just recap the Bruins draft class quickly. I mentioned Dean Letourneau, center, first-round pick, 25th overall, 6'7", heading to BC in the fall. Their second pick came in the 4th round. As Bridget mentioned, they trade up 12 spots, take Elliot Gronwald, 6'2" defenseman who was in Cedar Rapids in the USHL this past year, heading to Quinnipiac this fall, known more as a kind of defensive shutdown, physical player with a little bit of puck skill. He was open when he met with the media that's the area of his game he has to work on the most. 5th round, 154. Bruins took center Jonathan Morello, who put up a lot of points in the OJHL, which is not to be confused with the OHL. OHL, major junior. OJHL is a junior level below that in Canada, in Ontario. He's heading to the USHL this year and then is committed to Clarkson University for 2025. And then their final pick came in the 6th round. Another big left shot defenseman, Loke Johansson out of Sweden, 6'3". Played for AIK's junior team in Stockholm last season, but also played 19 games up with their pro team, which is in the 2nd tier of Swedish pro hockey. So he's already played some professional hockey against men much older than him.
So I want to start with the 25th overall pick in Dean Letourneau. So I think that he's listed at 6'6" or 6'7", and that's,
it depends where you look. There's multiple.
So let's call him 6'6.5". Let's just call him that.
NHL.com has him at 6'7". So
yeah.
Okay, so he's 6'7". So on skates, he's what, 6'9", 6'8.5", 6'9", and he's a center.
Mm-hmm.
He's a center who can skate the way that he skates and has the talent to make plays around the net and the IQ that all scouts are saying that he possesses.
Yeah.
Look, at 25, I think I really applaud the Bruins for this draft selection. And I think that Don Sweeney and the Bruins have been they've been criticized certainly at the draft in the last decade. And one of their big criticisms at times as it pertains to drafting centers is that they tend to draft for the low ceiling, high floor player, right? The more risk adverse player who can come in and maybe plug into a middle 6 role or something like that. And this is everything but that, right? I mean, this player, yeah, he's incredibly raw because he's got size that he doesn't know how to use yet, right? And
though I will say, the scouting that I saw was that even though he's the size that he is, he's not like an awkward skater. Like, he's actually a pretty smooth skater, and he's not. Sometimes you see like the lanky guys that, like you said, don't necessarily know how to work their body yet, like still kind of figuring it out. But doesn't seem like an issue for him. Like more, I think he has it under control more so than some of the younger, tall, lanky guys do.
For sure. And just to clarify that, yeah, I'm not talking about his skating because that's evident, and that's one of his assets, by all accounts. I more so mean using his body physically in one-on-one battles. How to use your size along the wall, how to use your size in the middle of the ice, in front of the net, in the D zone, all that stuff. So those are things. But at the end of the day, like I just think that he's a project for sure, and I applaud the Bruins for taking a swing. And I tend to be more optimistic than not that he'll at least be an NHL player, I would say, hopefully. I think he definitely has the potential to be a unicorn in the league with his size and skill. Yeah. And so for that uniqueness, the Bruins deserve credit. And I trust in the Bruins to develop him, and I trust in the player to want to develop himself. And he's talked about what he has to work on. I think going to BC is going to be great for his development, and we'll see what the future holds. But I like the pick because at 25, guys, I think Scott, you said this, it's like it's a crapshoot. Yeah, the draft in general is a crapshoot. You just never know. So the later in the rounds you get, or it's take a shot.
And that's why the Bruins probably had a really hard time if they wanted to trade 25 overall to find a taker, because it's not necessarily like a sure thing to trade into that spot and get someone that is going to impact your team. Maybe ever, you never know. But what I like about Letourneau's skill set is that, like you said, even if he's never a top 6 guy, he's not someone that has to be like in that skill top 6. He could still play in your bottom 6 and fit in fine. Like when we were talking about Fabian Lysell the other day, it's like, well, he's not really a 4th line guy. Like that's just not his makeup. But with Letourneau, he could be, right? He could be. And one of the things that almost every prospect has to deal with transitioning to the NHL is learning how to use their body physically, like how to play along the boards and brace for checks and lay checks and things like that. So yeah, that's going to be something that he can work on at Boston College. And for people that are, maybe now more interested in watching more BC games this year, he's for them projected to be a bottom 6 forward, at least to start. So he's not going to be one of their top 2 line centers. There was turnover there, obviously Cutter Gauthier leaving. So the center position is a little bit more open there, but
Cutter Gauthier and Will Smith. I mean, BC's top 2 centers are gone. So I would probably expect him more as like a 3rd liner there to start. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the openings that Hagens is going to be he's going to be their top center. He's going to be the number 1 overall pick next year. But there is an opening there for him to potentially move up the lineup.
Yeah,
is Leonard going to Washington, or is he staying at BC for another year?
He's staying.
Yeah.
Okay.
He hasn't left. So, they're going to have another really great roster this year. Even with losing Will Smith and Cutter Gauthier, that's going to be a crazy good team, which they've just kind of been putting those together for a little bit now. And Letourneau was, somebody that they recruited, and I'm sure Sweeney had his eye on Letourneau as well, and probably talked a lot to the same people that BC was talking to, and the people from Boston College, and more what you to expect out of a guy that comes out of BC, because I think they have a really good system to develop kids under, because a lot of times they're dealing with polishing off top talent, right? Like these are kids like Will Smith who already had a great skill set, but you're polishing them off to be more well-rounded. And that's what the Bruins could use Letourneau learning in college. And he could stay there as long as he needs. He could stay there 1 year, 2 years, 4 years. And the Bruins will know, when they're ready to take him up, because they'll be able to watch him pretty much all the time. I assume that the games that I'm going to be at BC, I'll see Don Sweeney there a few times. Adam McQuaid, I see a lot out at rinks. So they have their whole staff looking around Hockey East.
Yeah, with Letourneau, the upside, the comparison you see the most, and one that he even makes, he says he models his game after, is Tage Thompson, Sabre center, who was 26th overall pick when he got drafted, originally by St. Louis, and then he got traded. But he already had a year at UConn under his belt, so he had a little more to go on with that pick in terms of him facing a higher level of competition. So Letourneau is a little bit more of a wild card in that sense because, again, Canadian prep school just, like they play some Massachusetts prep teams. They play your Shattuck St. Mary's. They do play top U.S. prep schools, but that's still, a pretty significant drop off from college hockey. I guess the other end of it is like, if he, if that skill doesn't come along, the offense doesn't translate, and he ends up in bottom six, like you guys are saying. Another comparison I saw, since he's going to BC, Brian Boyle, like that, which obviously you're hoping for more than that out of a first round pick, but Brian Boyle still had a really long, successful NHL career. So, it's going to take a little while. Tage Thompson, he turned pro after his sophomore year at UConn and did get some NHL games, but his breakout really didn't come until 5 years after getting drafted. He was drafted in 2016.
Right.
The 21-22 season is when he explodes for 38 goals. Prior to that, it was like 5, 6, 7 goals. Like,
yeah,
it's going to take a little bit. So, like,
yeah,
just caution fans to be caught. Like, if you're the kind of fan who thinks that a first round pick's a bust if they're not making an impact by age 21, this isn't the pick for you. It's probably going to take a little longer than that.
Yeah. And well, how are we feeling about the return for the Allmark trade now, knowing what the pick turned into?
Well, again, I'm optimistic because, I think Allmark was gone in a year anyway. So, but again, it's far too early to tell. I just wanted to kind of circle back to what Scott was just saying, because that's what I was about to talk about, was patience with the player. And yes, Tage Thompson is a high-end comparable. I don't see, all due respect to Brian Boyle, I think there's probably a little bit more offense to his game naturally, but Brian Boyle also was incredible at the NCAA level, and we haven't seen him play a game yet at NCAA. And so, yeah, that's a big factor. I think, Bridget, the reason he's going to be in BC in a bottom six role to start, in addition to just having the future number one overall pick as your top center, I think is because he still has to adjust to playing against men, which NCAA hockey is. But yeah, Tage Thompson,
he's the size of, he's got all the size there.
Yes, exactly. And that's why it's going to take some time, but I'm so glad that Scott brought up the Tage Thompson patience, because if the St. Louis Blues knew Tage Thompson was going to turn into Tage Thompson, they probably wouldn't have traded him. And yeah, you look at Tage Thompson now in Buffalo.
They still would have, because they got Ryan O'Reilly. So,
Okay, fair enough. I forgot that.
Big role in a cup winner. So I guess that kind of turned into
all right,
a
both teams then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what I would say about Tage,
that was Yeah, I think the internet's a little spotty for us right now. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
I think it's you.
Just wrap it up quick. What's with you? But yeah. Yeah.
So what I was going to say
I'm
about
just gonna stop talking. You guys go ahead. You guys go ahead. I don't know what the reception issue is.
It's here. You're at home too. Like, you're not even at the office, or it's normally bad. Your computer doesn't like you, maybe.
I don't think it's me. I have full service, but I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever.
So when I was in college, Tage Thompson was at UConn. And that's when I started broadcasting, and I remember broadcasting a few UMass UConn games when he was there. And I will say that in college, Tage Thompson did not really look like a prospect that was going to turn out to be the way he is. Like, he way overshot what I would have thought watching him in college. So, like, even if Letourneau in college isn't stealing spots in the top 6, it still can be a longer curve than that, and especially at a school that presumably will continue to get some of the top prospects available and guys that are projected to go first round year after year, that the way that they have been. So Tage Thompson in college was not somebody I was thinking is going to be scoring the way that he's been scoring, dominating. Like, he seemed like, he was going to be an NHLer for sure, but not to the extent that he's been able to lift his game. And that, like you said, it took a while, even in the NHL. After a few seasons, he started to really hit his stride. So yeah, patience for sure. And if Letourneau at BC doesn't necessarily put up like crazy numbers, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be a bust.
Yeah, and I'll note, like, I think the biggest knock on him right now, and I saw Evan Marinovsky talked about this. He saw some of his games when they played mass prep teams. Evan covers a lot of prep hockey, but he will take some shifts off or float at times, or just not always be fully engaged. And again, to me, that's almost about the level. Like, he could do that in prep school and still put up just monster point totals and take over games. So now you're going to jump up to BC and eventually pro. You can't take shifts off. Like, you can't drift in and out. You can't be disengaged away from the puck. So, that's very common among 18-year-old players. Like, that's certainly not a rarity. But it is something to watch. Like, you want to see him giving it his all every shift at BC this year, because he's not going to be able to just easily dominate. He's not going to be able to take a shift off and then decide, okay, but I'm going to take over the next shift.
Yeah, far from it in college, right? Like, you're playing in Hockey East, you're like a BC BU game. You can't take a shift off during that. Like, and you know what? I think that sometimes it comes with guys feeling like they've really reached the ceiling of development in one level, and they're just ready for the next level. And they kind of know that they can dominate without having to put in as much effort in his high school. So there was only one other thing, Brian. I think your internet looks better.
Good.
There was only one other thing I wanted to mention from the draft, which has to do with just talking about first rounders that the Bruins have had since the 2016 draft, when they drafted McAvoy. Like, that was a huge draft for them. Great first round picks, obviously there, but since then they really haven't had a lot of first round picks. And I just wanted to read off like what they have been. So the highest pick that they've had since McAvoy was Eero Vakanainen at number 18 in 2017. And then they had Beecher at 30 in 2019, Lysell at pick 21 in 2021, and then Letourneau at 25 in 2024. And we know that Vakanainen didn't end up working for the Bruins. We know that Lysell is still hasn't played a game in Boston. Beecher is the guy that has created a role for himself and as a fourth line center or winger at times. But with their first round picks, they've all been pretty late since, like I said, since the 2016 draft, or they just didn't happen at all. Like last year, their earliest pick was number 3. So I should say third round. So that's who you have to look through for over the past several years of what the Bruins got out of the first round.
Yeah, hopefully the internet's better. Do you guys have me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. I just want to add to that, Scott. You can certainly go ahead. I just want to add to that. Vakanainen at least has carved out a role for himself in Anaheim. Now it appears,
and worked enough to help you get Hampus Lindholm. Like he wasn't just a throw-in. Like he was actually one of the key pieces of that trade. So he at least still had some value. Certainly Anaheim at least saw it. All I was gonna say is they've really honestly had more success in the second round, which is where you got Mason Lohrei and where you got Matt Patra, who have already gotten to the NHL and at least looked like players who are going to make an impact for you for a long time. Not that Jack Stanigo is anything great, but that was a second round pick who played games. This is why getting into the first round and making a pick was important, though, because as I said in the last pod, you do have to think about the future too. You can't just always be and win now, live in the moment. There has to be some planning, because at some point you need young, cheap players to come in and fill fill more than fourth line roles. Like, yeah, anyone can go out and find fourth liners. Like, you can, look at the top college free agents most years, and you can probably sign a fourth liner off of that list. But finding guys who can actually play up in the lineup and make an impact, like as the Bruins are about to find out on Monday, trying to fill key spots in your lineup at the top of your lineup by free agency or trade is expensive. Like it adds up. It's not, at some point it stops being a sustainable model if that's the only way you're filling in the top of your lineup.
Yeah, because then you hit cap trouble again. It's like you're inevitably, like you're perpetually in cap trouble if you don't add some guys that are younger and on rookie deals, and rather than like peak of their career numbers. So they had a little bit of that last year with Beecher and Patra, and even Swayman to an extent, because now obviously we're going to watch his salary go up even more. So I don't know if you guys had any final thoughts on Letourneau before we maybe talk a little bit about Lauko, because he's a bottom, he's a fourth liner that you let go. They still have plenty of options there. It's not like they're lacking players that can fill in, but he was one of the only guys on your team that would fight. And yeah, I do know that he was well liked by the team, and he had quite a personality. So yeah, he's not there anymore. You haven't, like, so far we don't know what's going to happen with Maroon. So like you're more limited with the guys that might be willing to mix it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I liked Lauko. I like the energy he brought. Certainly appreciated what he tried to do, but he didn't do. I even as a fourth liner, I just don't think he created enough scoring chances. But at the end of the day, I liked the player, and he had a lot of spunk. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a team he had 2 fights against in 2 games this past year is who he got traded to. Had back-to-back fights against Minnesota, I think, in like a week or 2 stretch. And I think Bill Guerin probably took notice of that because he made his presence known in those games. That said, I think that the Lauko trade is the latest example of how fans just love to bitch and complain about everything. Like, you would think that the Bruins traded Charlie McAvoy, but I look up at it's Jakub Lauko. I mean, the hysteria over trading Jakub Lauko, guys, can we please just come on? What are we doing? Like, yeah, he's not a bad player, but what are we doing? So it's just like, it's the nature of the business. Your favorite players are gonna leave. At all the Jake DeBrusk fans, all the Lauko fans, all the Allmark fans, guys, like, this is part of the business. It happens. Don't fall in love with your players forever because they're gonna move on. You can fall in love with them, but just get used to cheering for them in a different jersey at some point. It's a business, so it's a business casualty at the end of the day. And did the Bruins have to make this move? No, it was definitely a little bit random, but they felt they wanted to. It is what it is.
And they already have. Look at all the guys they already have signed next season for fourth liners. Like, they got Kastelik now, who they got in the trade for Allmark. They have Brezo. They have Beecher. Boquist is a restricted free agent, so he could come back. They had too many pieces already there, so someone was going to be the odd man out. I kind of thought it was going to be Boquist. Maybe he still might be gone because, like I said, he's a restricted free agent and he hasn't signed a contract yet with Boston, but they already have plenty of fourth line guys, so somebody was going to end up being the one to go.
Yeah, and I know, like, I heard on Twitter, and I'm sure you guys saw some of it, but like, there seem to be some people, Bruins fans, who think Lauko still has upside to be more than that. And listen, I like him personally, so I'd love to see him go to Minnesota and grow his offensive game and become more than that. But personally, I don't see it. Like, I think he kind of hit his ceiling as a fourth liner. The offense was never there last year. As much as you like this energy and willingness to drop the gloves and the speed and all that, like, there was no finishing touch and minimal playmaking. So, they tried him on the third line at times, and it usually didn't go very well. So, he's a nice player to have around. And if he's your 12th, 13th forward, I think that's fine. But obviously they liked a player there that they felt was worth going up to 110 for, and moving Lauko helped them do it. And to me, it's fine. Like I just don't think that really moves the needle in one direction or another. As you said, like they have other options on that fourth line. I think Sweeney even alluded to this on Thursday when he met with the media, saying that, they kind of envision Kastelik and Beecher kind of alternating on and off on faceoffs, and maybe who's center, who's wing. And it's like, well, if Beecher's on the wing, like that's the left side. As you mentioned, Brazeau, I think, is at the very least going to be a full-time fourth liner, and maybe even pushed to be higher in the lineup. So yeah, like to me, there wasn't really especially if Boquist is back, there's just not really a regular lineup spot for Lauko.
And in addition to that, a lot of the players last year, I mean, honestly, guys, outside of Pasternak and Zacha and Marchand, and I guess at times DeBrusk, like all those other forwards were sometimes playing higher in a lineup than they would be on a truly deep team. So if the Bruins go out and add, a couple of players in free agency and it slots the players down from where they were last year, well, now even like the fourth liners from last year, like Brazeau, to your point, he might be a fourth liner this year, right? So that bumps somebody, and I know Brazeau came on late in the season last year, but by season's end, he was where he was on a third line role. So, yeah, and don't forget, Scott, and I commented you this online, but the Bruins also got $12,500 worth of cap alleviation with this trade too. So,
huge.
If it comes down to a penny here, penny there in free agency, the people will be thinking of heavens that they made this move.
They probably will be pretty damn tight to the cap. So, I mean, it's like you say it facetiously, but like maybe who knows? It's going to be a tight one.
Yeah, and by the way, Vinny Lettieri, I think we would all project to spend more time in Providence like he did 2 years ago when he was here. And everyone in Providence loved him. Like he was kind of a team leader there. He will be if he's there again this year. But he can also play in the NHL. He played 40-something games for Minnesota last year. He's spent time in the NHL in Anaheim. So, it's not like you just like completely took away a fourth line depth piece and now you're just thinner. Like you got someone who's probably not going to be, make Boston out of camp, but who absolutely could be called up and hold his own. Like Vinny Lettieri's not, he's not a nobody. So we'll just add that in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of leaves us with our final topic, which is some of the moves that could happen in the next few days, some of the trades that might happen, some of the free agents that the Bruins are connected with. And I know I saw last night on Twitter all over the place, the Bruins being, a talk of the Bruins and Zadorov being a potential match, which is that's a guy that could add to your defense and add some grit. And I think a lot of people were, and I believe I saw both of you on board with that if that were to happen.
Scott, it all depends on cost. Obviously, I like Zadorov. He brings good physicality. To me, I still kind of view him more as a third pairing guy on like a really legit cup team. But if you bring him in here, so he's a left shot defenseman, Hampus Lindholm's in your top four. And then if you're toggling Zadorov, Lohrei until Lohrei really takes a top four job and runs with it, like that makes a lot of sense. He can play, Zadorov can play up in the lineup for a while if Lohrei needs some time on the third pairing to kind of get going this season. Like, so I will say, I think the tip off here came on Thursday when I think it was Kevin Paul Dupont asked Sweeney, how does Monday look for you in a perfect world? Like, what do you come away with in free agency? And first thing Sweeney said was strengthening down the middle. No surprise. They are going for a center. Like, we've all known that for a long time. And then the second thing he said was reinforcing the defense. It was not finding a scoring wing, which, look, they'd love to do both, and we'll see how the money plays out, but you might have to prioritize one above the other there. And Sweeney's comments were, told me that they're prioritizing defense. If they have to pick between those two things, a winger or a defenseman, they're going defense in their perfect world. So I think that was kind of the tip off, and not surprising that over the weekend you start to hear them being linked to defensemen, because I think that's kind of sent off the alarms, and everyone started asking around like, hey, what defensemen are they in on? Who are they going to be going after? And you end up with Zadorov's name popping up quite a bit.
And that includes 32 Thoughts with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick, which was published late last night. So after the draft had concluded, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, who hilariously are always in on everybody if you're reading online speculation, and because Toronto is the self-proclaimed by Ontario natives Mecca of hockey, they're always being written about and talked about, like the Patriots are talked about in New England during the Belichick Brady era, or even current day. So they're always talking about the Maple Leafs, and they're always in on everybody, despite signing for the rights to Chris Tanev and having to sign him, and not having a ton of cap space as it is, but they're in on everybody.
The fans think they're in on everybody. I'll put it that way. Last trade deadline, I was dying laughing after I saw one video, a guy going outside the that area where they watch the games, like the outside viewing area. Guy going through the crowd asking who they should. It was at the trade deadline. It's like asking who they should trade for, and like he made a list of like 6 people said Connor McDavid. Like few people said Sidney Crosby. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, guys, that's who you get now the trade deadline.
Yeah, but I mean that the same thing happens when you do that with Bruins fans. So
I know.
That's every fan base.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, McDavid, yeah.
Yeah, and we should know the Maple
By the way, a
Leafs
few people that they listed they already had on the team, which was really funny. It's like, he's on your team already.
Yeah, we should note the Leafs did trade for Chris Tanev's rights, so
right.
At the very least, we know that they are in on him, and it certainly seems like they're probably going to sign him.
Right, and that's why I'm saying, like, I'm seeing that the Maple Leafs are in on all these players after signing for his rights. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to plan to pay him too. So how are you going to pay? But whatever, and hey, look, I mean, you have Toronto beat writers that are reporting this stuff. So I mean, you have to take them at their word. I'm sure Toronto is interested where they can. But ultimately, what I was trying to say was that Elliot Friedman said that they're going to have competition from Boston on Zadorov. So Scott, to your point about Sweeney's comments, I too, from those comments and just reading around the last few days, came to that exact conclusion myself, that look, the Bruins are going to have, they got we put it on the Twitter account. I think that according to Puckpedia, they have $25 million in projected cap space. I think a fair assumption, just for a ballpark, is eventually 8 of that's going to go to Swayman. So that kind of leaves you with around 17 million or so, give or take, for the Bruins to go shop in free agency. So I think they clearly want to target a center, right? Which is probably going to be, I don't know. We're not going to play that guessing game right now, but I do think they're going to, in order of spending, they're going to go 1C, and then left defense, and then potentially with whatever left they have, I do think they would try to target a middle 6 forward with upside. So like if they go for Lindholm and Zadorov, and then like an Anthony Duclair or something like that, I could see that being the case, because even if the Bruins had all the money in the world, you still have competition. Like other teams have money that's willing to spend too. So it's going to be interesting. I just think the Bruins are kind of in on everybody. And the Steven Stamkos news, right? Like Tampa Bay, they flush out Sergachev. They can't come to an agreement with Stamkos. They get rid of Tanner Jeannot. So they're lining up the dollars probably to go after somebody like Jake Gensel. Is Steven Stamkos somebody that the Bruins are like, oh, we didn't actually think he was going to be available, but now he is? And on that same 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman linked Nashville as a team that's going to go heavy on Stamkos if he's available. So, we're less than a day away, and we have all these questions, and we have no answers. The Bruins can go in many directions. And I would just say, I see fans that are like, No on Zadorov. No, guys, look, the guy would. I'm focused. To be honest, I'm focused on next year as opposed to 6 years from now. Like, there's always ways to move contracts and buy people out if things don't go well or whatever. Like, I think he would significantly um, help give that blue line an identity that no team would want to face, because now you have McAvoy, now you have Lindholm, now you have Carlo and Lohrei. It's like you add in Zadorov. That's a pretty damn good blue line. That's very versatile and brings a lot of things to the table. So Elias Lindholm, I can see the trepidation there, but for Zadorov, I wouldn't really have too much of a problem really with any price tag.
Yeah, and then you also have Witherspoon as your 7th probably. So like that's a pretty solid top 7 defenseman
Peak
that
was
you
good
have.
too. Peak was really
I mean,
good. I like that.
That's better than solid. That's one of the best decors in the league.
I think so, right?
Yeah.
Like I see the trepidation with Lindholm. People being like, I don't want to give Lindholm, $8 million for 7. Like, I get that, because Lindholm, he's a good player, but he's not an elite number 1 center in the league, and he is the quintessential like overpay, right? If you have to overpay a little bit for Zadorov, I think you look at the team that's bounced Boston in the last couple of years and that just won a Stanley Cup. I mean, Florida and teams like Florida would have a much more difficult time imposing the will against Boston if that's your blue line. In fact, the Bruins would impose their will. So I would like that deal, even at a slight overpay. But I've talked enough. You guys can ramble yourselves now.
I'm really interested to see what Zadorov ends up going for, because this was somewhat surprising. Like, I was looking at Evolving Hockey's contract projections, and that they only have him at 3 years, $4 million a year. I think it's almost certainly going to be more than that. Like, I look at that and I'm like, that's about how I value Zadorov. I like him. I'm probably not as big of a fan as a lot of people. So I'd be like, but I would sign up for that all day. I feel like it's almost certainly going to be more. Like, it's going to be at least 4 or 5 years. Probably going to bump up over $5 million a year or somewhere in that neighborhood. So we'll see. There is a point that it would get to on him where I'd be like, no, I'm out. Like, if it gets to like 6 by $6 million, to me, that he's not worth that to me. But yeah, I absolutely understand the interest and would like him at a somewhat reasonable cost. On Elias Lindholm, this has obviously been reported elsewhere, and it's not surprising to anyone, but I do think the Bruins' interest in him is very real. Like, I know everyone's made the connections for a long time because they need a center, and he looks like he's probably the top center available. I think they're really going to be in on him and be aggressive. But to your point, Brian, I do wonder if Stamkos changed that at all, where if he is actually going to the market and open to going somewhere else, would the Bruins suddenly vault him ahead of Lindholm in terms of who they're targeting? And obviously he brings a lot more cup experience and at his peak was, light years better than Elias Lindholm could ever dream of being. But is older now, reportedly wants something longer term still, despite his age. And I've said this before, but like, you do have to note on Stamkos, he's played more wing than center in recent years. And his 5-on-5 numbers this past season, not just talking about point totals or goals, but like on ice, goals for, goals against, chances for, chances against, his 5-on-5 numbers were not good this year. Like, there were times he was like a borderline liability at 5-on-5. So
power play, he's still very good.
Power play, he's still the best. He's probably the best power play goal scorer in the world. So, but even there, he plays the same spot as Pastrnak on that left elbow. So, you'd have to figure out how you're going to reconfigure the power play.
And he's, like you said, he's 5 years older than Lindholm. Lindholm is 29. Stamkos is 34. You don't see a lot of long-term contracts given to guys that are their mid-30s. That's not really a smart move most of the time. And like you said, obviously Bruins need help on the power play, but this might not be the piece that makes the most sense on the power play. And I think they're looking for a longer-term solution at center, right? Lindholm at 29 years old, you can sign to a decent contract, and you can know he will be in your system, and you don't have to keep going out every year in free agency and going, oh, here we go again. Like, need another center, like it's a little bit longer term solution, would probably add some extra stability. And I think it'd be more worth it.
Or, and I don't mean this to be combative, Bridget. I'm actually curious, like, or do they? Like, do they want somebody with longer term? Like, would they want maybe a short, like Stamkos, who's in his mid-30s, who doesn't have much time left? Like, what could Stamkos be asking for term? How old is he?
He's 34.
So what's the term he's looking for?
I
wouldn't give more than 2.
I mean, I saw a report that like he's one of these guys who is like such a fitness freak that he's adamant he's playing into his 40s. So like, I think he could be pushing for 5, 6, 7 years.
That's not.
I mean,
obviously, some of that's going to depend on the situation. If no one's offering it, then it's not there. But
I mean, the other thing here, guys, too, is the cap is projected to just kind of to keep climbing, right? So $1 today isn't necessarily $1 tomorrow, right? If you have to overpay today, like, is it? You know what I'm trying to get at? Like, are teams willing to overpay, quote unquote, today when they know, maybe in a few years it doesn't look as expensive? That's another thing too. But I wanted to ask you guys a question because I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with one at a time. Somebody asked me on Twitter when the last time was that somebody won a Stanley Cup after acquiring their number one center through free agency. And admittedly, for ease, I went back simply to the year 2000, and there have been no cup winners where their number one center was acquired through free agency. And I'm sure if we dated that back even further, it would go even further back. Mark Savard, Scott, you mentioned, was a free agent acquisition by Boston and turned their franchise around into what ended up becoming a Stanley Cup champion. And had it not been for career-ending injury, would have been on the ice during that cup run. Who knows? Honestly, you just never know how that affects other players because Krejci emerged and Bergeron, whatever. But his name is on the cup with Boston, and he was a huge culture driver in addition to Zdeno Chara through free agency. Ryan O'Reilly, as we mentioned earlier, in the Tage Thompson trade, which, just to go back, St. Louis would do that a million times over. I forgot that was the actual trade with Thompson. But yes, that was a trade, and Jack Eichel was traded to Vegas, and they won cups shortly thereafter. So the moral of the story is free agent centers.
The moral of the story is that the Buffalo Sabres can draft number one cup-winning centers and not keep them.
Yes.
Right. But moral of the story is free agency is not a recipe for Stanley Cup success. But again, what choice do the Bruins have? Their center prospects, Letourneau, we just talked about, and others, they're years away, and a hockey trade for a number one center is unlikely. So they're handcuffed. What do you do? Roll out Zacha, Coyle, and Patra? That's not acceptable either. So what do you guys make of that comment and the truth behind it? But at the same time, what does that mean for the Bruins right now? Not a whole lot.
Just correct myself before someone calls me out. O'Reilly was obviously Colorado pick, but was in Buffalo. So
right.
Yeah.
We're not historians on this podcast. So we don't pretend to be.
Well, sometimes Scott likes to pull out some random facts that he goes in deep dives, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the cup teams don't sign number one centers. Well, number one centers don't get to free agency. And again, we can even debate whether Elias Lindholm's, a true number one center. Like if you go back to who those number one centers are on those cup teams, I'm going to guess the vast majority of them were drafted in the top 10, if not the top 5, because that is where you find number one centers. Generally, the vast majority of them you find there. You don't find them later in the first. You don't find them in the second or third. Occasionally you do. The Bruins got Bergeron in the second. But it's rare. Usually those guys are at the top of the draft. Teams lock them up for a long time. They never get to free agency. They never get traded. Jack Eichel is obviously one very notable exception recently. It's even ahead of a number one goalie. It's the hardest. That and number one defensemen are the hardest positions to get. And when you get them, you don't let them go. So it's the combination of those two things. It's those Cup winners had high draft picks to draft those guys, and the 2011 Bruins stand out as an exception there. And 2 is just that true elite number 1 centers just don't get to free agency.
Yeah, but to your point about like you need to draft those kind of centers really early, Elias Lindholm was the number 5 overall pick in his draft. Like he went in the first round. It was a while ago now. He went in the 2013 draft to Carolina with a 5th overall pick. So he's the pedigree, that kind of pedigree in the background to fit the mold that you're talking about, Scott. But there's a reason why he made it to free agency, like you're saying, in that he got traded at the deadline last season, and he's a little bit he's almost a little bit of a risk just based on some of the stuff we know about him over the past season or so, and in all the talks about his name coming up at the trade deadline and what teams were interested in him, and the Bruins, it seems like, still are, but he's not a surefire number 1 center by any means, but he's still probably the closest thing on the market to that. So that's what you're looking for.
And also, I just looked this up. It's June of 2024 right now, dating back the last 20 years to June of 2004. The Boston Bruins have the most wins in the National Hockey League over the last 2 decades. Why I say that is just to illustrate the fact that they haven't had a lot of opportunities to draft higher in the draft because they're always competitive. And in the regular season, over 20 years, have collected the most wins. So in 2005-06 and 06-07, yes, they were rebuilding, so they were not great those 2 years, and they were like 13th in the East. But 2004, I believe they were first or second in the East, then the lockout, couple of down years. Claude comes in 07-08, and the rest is pretty much history. A little bit of a reset in 14-15, but the Bruins have always been at the top of the standings or around there for the last 20 years, so they haven't had high draft picks. And Tyler Seguin was acquired through trade to get that number 2 overall pick with Toronto, trading Phil Kessel, who was a top 5 pick of their own previously. And then, so it's yes, what I'm trying to say is to draft and develop, your future top centers and to do it high in the draft. That's the dream. That's the goal, right? Ask Chicago, ask Pittsburgh, ask others. But it's just not the.
It comes at a cost of not being competitive for a year.
Well, that's what I was saying. It just hasn't been the reality of the Bruins. Now, if Bruins fans want to really, dive deep into here and be like, well, yeah, the Bruins are constantly regular season darlings because they want playoff gates and they want to be good but not great, and that's and we'd be willing to sacrifice a couple of bad years. Again, I don't really know what to say there. I mean, go for it. But I'm just trying to explain the reality of the situation is they haven't had top picks because they've had those regular season wins. Whether or not you wanted them or not to be drafting higher, that's up to the individual fan. But that's the reality. That's obviously the optimal way to go about getting these guys. But it's just not the situation the Bruins are in, and it predates the current regime. It goes back 2 decades. It's just the way that it is. Like, it's the culture that they've had of being successful for whatever reason, city demand, popularity. I don't know, but it's the situation they're in.
Yeah, and it's a unique situation because a lot of times when a team's number 1 star center retires, that's kind of the end of an era and you're resetting and going down in the draft anyways. And the Bruins are trying to be and appear to be on the track of being the rare team that still has enough in place all around to not have to go down, to not have to really bottom out and reset after the retirements of Bergeron and Krejci, your 2 longtime top centers. Like, what do we think the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to do when Crosby and Malkin retire? I don't think they're going to be in the position the Bruins are in to just remain competitive.
They're going to be in the same position they were when they drafted Crosby and Malkin, which is at the bottom of the league, drafting first.
Yeah, Tampa might be moving on from Stamkos. They found Braden Point along the way. So, like, that's another one that's pretty unique. But, like, the Blackhawks had to bottom out at, obviously, Taves and Kane, sort of as a package deal there. But they bottomed out when one franchise number one center was done, and then they went to the number one pick and got their next franchise number one.
I mean, conceptually, guys, I think it's kind of a separate conversation, right? The willingness to tank or go through a rebuild. The Bruins will never do that, at least under this current regime. I don't think they are willing to do it. Now, we and others can sit here and debate if that stubbornness ultimately leads to less Stanley Cups over a longer period of time. I think that's a fair conversation because the teams that have had multiple cups, it is because of high-end draft picks. But again, I don't really, it's a slippery slope. I don't really even know where to begin with that because it just predates all of us. And it's just, you know what I mean? It's impossible to really.
Bergeron in that era, that they were never going to, have down seasons during that, like too bad, because like, obviously the goal was to try to get Bergeron another cup and some of those guys another cup. And then you see this era, it's like, okay, we need to add the thought process being like, we need to add players around Pasternak and McAvoy and now Swayman and use this core as an opportunity to win a cup, because this core is strong enough to do that if you add the right pieces around them. And to speak to, they've just it's never been an obvious thing for them to do at any point here in the last few years. Like even when sometimes it's like, oh, okay, maybe it never turns out to be, because this season they end up making it, make the playoffs, make the second round. Like if they had missed the playoffs, but like just barely, maybe we'd be having this conversation like, maybe they should have kind of bottomed out this year, but it wouldn't have made sense. And I mean, it's, to me, I don't like to have the argument about like, oh, should they have tanked? I don't like watching tanking hockey. I think that if you're clever enough, you can put together a team that doesn't have those top picks on it. And if you look, especially look last season, look at the historic season that they had. They didn't have to, wait around to get better draft picks for that. They traded for those guys that made them better. And they traded for Taylor Hall, right? Like that's a guy who was number one in his draft, but you got him really cheap. So like, you don't necessarily need to bottom out.
You hit it, Bridget. Like they can't bottom out because their pieces in place are too good. When the Bruins back in 06, 07, in 05, 06, when the Bruins, when they traded away Thornton and, pre-Chara, I mean, it was Bergeron and that was it. Like you didn't have anybody else. You didn't have a number one defenseman. You didn't have the Bruins right now. You have a number one goalie of the future. You have a top defenseman, a top 10 defenseman in the league when he's going. We haven't even talked about the Four Nations announcement, by the way, of the top 6 players for each team. And you have Pasternak, who's one of the best goal scorers in the world. This Bruins team, unless you're trading all those guys, which good luck replacing them to get a number one center. They're not rebuilding, and they never, and nor should they have been trying to in the wake of Bergeron and Krejci retiring. It's just not. They're not there. They never will be.
They were a destination for free agents. Like when you're good and you have like good players and you have a good like culture and organization, you're a destination for free agents to want to come to, or even like Taylor Hall, like guys with a trade list that like, or trade clauses, like they'll waive it to come to Boston because that's a destination that they want to play in. Like, and think about it. Pasternak, not that long ago was trying to sign an extension. And if you were going to bottom out, like if they saw that was on the horizon, maybe Pasta doesn't sign here. You know what I mean? Like maybe tries to go somewhere else. Like there's so much that goes into it that, and I don't think Sweeney would ever take that as an approach. It doesn't seem like him. And they've been able to trade for guys that were high draft picks, like Pavel Zacha, who was number 6 overall in his draft. So if you can find a way to sign Elias Lindholm, that you're making up for some of the drafts that you weren't able to get guys really high by going out and getting them other ways.
Right. Like they had as Brian brought up, like that mini reset around 2015, but they didn't want to do that. Like that wasn't by design. That wound up being a necessity for cap reasons. And the fact that they ended up there got Peter Chiarelli fired and led to a GM change. So if you're Don Sweeney, it's like you see that and it's like, hey, if I go 2 years out of the playoffs, like I'm probably losing my job. So yeah, they could look, it would have been completely understandable if they used last year as for 1 year, we're gonna just take a step back. We're gonna throw a bunch of young kids in, save cap space, whatever. They still tried to remain competitive. Sweeney went out and got veterans and guys who are willing to come in cheap and tried to plug holes in a bargain bin way and make the best of it. And they wound up winning a playoff series, which I think in the long run is going to be a good thing because now it allows everyone in that room to feel like, hey, we really are on the right track. And like, we're going to spend money this off season. We're going to, fill whatever holes, management still thinks we have. And then we're going to build on making it to the second round instead of, hey, we bottomed out. We missed the playoffs for a year, but like now we're going to build back. Like you feel more confident coming off last season, getting to the second round and now adding than if you had just accepted, a big step back and, hey, maybe 1 year out of the playoffs isn't the end of the world. Like then you have more of a ways to go this offseason to build back.
By the way, you're not ever going to be a tanking team when you have the two of the most elite goalies in the league. Like you're not going to lose enough games when you have goaltending that is as good as what they had. Like they're not going to go in and lose games on purpose. And you have like it just wasn't going to happen like that.
Actual tanking was never on the table. Like it was insane that there were fans who wanted to do that.
And
what I guess what I'm talking about is like for them, even just like the 1 year reset of like accepting a couple steps back, like that wasn't even really on the table for them.
And just to clarify, the reason for this tailspin of a discussion is simply because it has nothing to do with the state of the Bruins or what we're talking about with this current Bruins team. It was because somebody mentioned the idea of how free agency doesn't, free agent additions at center don't bring you to the Stanley Cup promised land, and it just kind of brought us down this rabbit hole of, well, we know that, but this whatever. So just to clarify for listeners, we're not talking about the Bruins. We're not saying this is what they should or could have done. It was just more of a random talking discussion. But anyway, I got 2 questions for you guys before we go because I know we're a little bit past here, but I want to get to these before tomorrow happens. I want to get to your Monday free agency wish list. Before we do that, I'll give you guys a second to think on it. What do you make of the Boston Bruins being the odds favorites to be the next team Leon Draisaitl plays for, according to certain betting apps and whatnot? Obviously, Spittin' Chicklets, who is plugged in, they've been hearing rumors about potentially Draisaitl to Boston at some point. I can't put any validity into anything other than what I see teams themselves tweet out. So but for fun discussion points, we talked about it. We texted about it. Obviously, Leon Draisaitl is a pending UFA following next season. Guys, unless there was a Taylor Hall situation where Draisaitl is saying to the Oilers, guys, I want to go to Boston. They're on my 10-team trade list. I want to go to Boston. I'm not re-signing with you guys next year. Figure it out. And then Boston finds a package that Edmonton is willing to accept out of necessity, not so much want. That's the only way I see the Bruins trading for Draisaitl. And even then, Edmonton can be like, well, tough shit. You're not signing with us next year? Cool. We're still keeping you for another cup run. What did you guys make of those odds, though, coming out?
Yeah, well, a couple things. So first off, I think people know that Boston sports fans bet a lot. We have a lot of degenerates. I've said this before, and like I legitimately mean it. But anytime there's like a big free agent or trade piece, whatever sport it is, the Boston team is near the top of the odds. And like whether there's been concrete reporting on it or not, they just like throw the Boston team in there, and it's got to be because like I legitimately think, one, there are just more fans in Boston, and two, we gamble a lot. Like we'll throw money at it. So like I think they know that.
But yes.
So I think that's part of it. Secondly, though, to to the more serious point, yeah, Greg Wyshynski mentioned it when he wrote about Draisaitl on ESPN, said that there's been whispers that he likes Boston. Draisaitl likes Boston. I think him and David Pastrnak are pretty friendly. Like, Pastrnak has always talked very glowingly about Draisaitl. So it's not nothing. Like, you can't totally ignore it, because the Oilers are in a situation where he's a year away and there has not been any sort of concrete answers on what's going to happen here. It sounds like they're kind of decompressing from the cup, and then they're going to get into serious talks about, okay, like, can we work out an extension, or do you want to go? Obviously the comparable here is that when Matthew Tkachuk was going to leave Calgary, he gave them a year notice and told them, like, I'm not re-signing. Let's figure something out. And Brian, that was kind of like the situation you laid out, where I don't know if Florida was the only team, but I think they were one of the few that he was willing to go to with an extension in place, which allowed the Flames to get more in return. And look at like what that costs. Like, Florida still have to give up a lot. Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar is, that's a pretty significant package. So I don't know what the Bruins equivalent of that is, or possibly even more, because Draisaitl's, to me, an even better player than Tkachuk, even though I love Tkachuk. Like, it's worth discussing, just because it's a possibility, because it like Leon Draisaitl leaving the Edmonton Oilers is something that could happen, and there's these whispers that he likes Boston, so like, we can't just pretend there's a 0% chance of it happening. I don't think it's a very high percentage, but it's above zero.
Most things are above 0% chance, but yes, I think that they obviously in Edmonton, they don't want to let him walk for nothing when you have one of the most valuable pieces in the NHL. So there are going to be teams just, poking around. Who knows how serious the conversations have gotten or will get, but it's also, it's risky when a guy has a year left. You want to have some assurance that they're going to be with your team longer than that before you give up a huge piece of your franchise, which is what it would take to get Leon Draisaitl. In our text conversation that we were having yesterday, we were talking about, okay, who would it take to get him? And it was like, oh, Pastrnak or McAvoy, but you're not trading Pasta, because that's probably who he wants to come play with. So you're looking at a piece as big as Charlie McAvoy having to go the other way for a guy that only has 1 year left on his contract. So that's always a risk, even if Edmonton was ready to deal him and Draisaitl was ready to come here. It's a huge move. Like, you're not swindling Edmonton out of him. You're going to have to give up a lot.
Well, yes. I mean, yes and no, because it like I said, if the player is telling the team, it's this. If Draisaitl's looking at Boston, because they are a very complete team, but they have one glaring hole, and he wants to be the guy for a team and not Robin, which is what he would be will always be to McDavid. Draisaitl could see Boston as a big hockey market, got all the pieces in place, but he's the missing piece, and he wouldn't want to go to Boston if he knew that Pastrnak was going the other way, because he wants to be his running mate. And I don't think Charlie McAvoy. I mean, I understand how good Draisaitl is. I also understand how valuable a true number one defenseman is, and I think that to take away your number one center or your number one defenseman to add a number one center, I think it's like you're giving and you're taking, and it's not ultimately pushing the needle to where you want to go. I think, like Scott said earlier in the podcast, number one goalies, number one defensemen, number one centers are the three hardest things to find. They don't grow on trees. So it seems a little bit, I don't know, silly to bring in one need just to let the other one go. And I think if Boston is his destination of choice, I think the Bruins could say to the Oilers, all right, I mean, here's Patra, here's Lorai, here's a first, here's this, here's that. Here's Kim Neely's Seabass costume from Dumb and Dumber. Like, I think they would try to do whatever they can to not include McAvoy or Pasternak because they probably have the leverage because Edmonton has to take what they can get. If Draisaitl tells Edmonton it's Boston or I'm not resigning, you know what I mean? So it just depends how it plays out. It's unlikely, but does this change how the Bruins, if the Bruins know that there's a lot of smoke to this fire potentially because they hear more than we do, obviously, like, do the Bruins want to sign Lindholm for, 7-7 or Stamkos if they know that they would probably need money? Like, does this change their targets on Monday if they know there's a lot of truth to this?
So a couple of things. One, I don't think so because I just don't think you can. I don't think you can like make your serious plan A revolve around something that has ultimately a very small. You make your moves for next season now. Like you can't be like, you know what, scrap all those plans that we had. We're just going to cling to this pipe dream that we're going to get Leon Draisaitl at some point. I don't think you can do that. I think what you do is you build your team now as it is, and then if a serious chance to get Draisaitl actually presents itself, then you figure everything else out from there. Like, then you make that and whatever you have to sell off and draft picks, you have to like, however you have to make it work from there, you can figure it out. One other thing I would just note. I didn't hear that. Sorry.
I said trade Elias Lindholm again. He's on and then he's off and then.
One other thing I would note, like if it were going to take McAvoy has a full no trade clause that kicks in Monday. So, like, if you're going to do that, the actual easiest time to do it would be right now, on Sunday, which I don't think is going to happen. So,
nope.
Doing that kind of trade gets a lot tougher after Monday because if Charlie McAvoy says, I don't want to go to Edmonton, then like you can't trade him to Edmonton. Then there's just nothing you can do about it.
And to be clear, Charlie McAvoy would probably say, I don't want to go anywhere. Sorry. Tough luck. Like I'm not leaving. Anyway, I think we've gone kind of long.
Well, so just quickly, Bridget, because I want to wrap this part up. A Leon Draisaitl to Boston possibility aside, again, 24 hours from now, just list maybe 3 names and allocate the 17 million or so wherever you want. Like, what would you guys
like to
that
math
see
right now? Like,
no, just pick 3 names. Pretend that they can get 3 guys with the 17 million. What would you like to see?
Well, you know what? I do think that Zadorov could be a good ad. And I think that Elias Lindholm should still be their first target for a center. I like Stamkos, but I still don't think he's your plan A more than likely. And I don't think they're getting Jake Getzel. So I'm totally fine with Lindholm and Zadorov being moves that you make. And to be honest, I'm not sure they get both of them because, you never know what's going to happen in free agency. But another guy that I liked that you were not going to fit all 3 of these guys in on the same team was Jonathan Marchessault, but he doesn't necessarily fit some of the needs that we were talking about. He fits a top 6 scorer. He's also on the older end. Those are guys that I like, but I don't think you can fit all 3 of those guys in.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like my actual plan A is 2 guys. Like I would go big. I'd go get Elias Lindholm for my center and Jake Gensel. Ideally like under 10 million. If it got that high, then yeah, you can't do it. Like that would be my actual plan A is get your center and get one of the really elite scoring wings that's out there. And I'll live with my defense as is for now and maybe revisit that at the trade deadline if that need help back there. But that would be my actual plan A would be home in Gensel or, obviously there's a chance you have to take a step down from Gensel if that bidding war gets too crazy to, maybe like March or so is that next tier. That would be my plan. I would be prioritizing the scoring wing over defense, but again, by all accounts, it seems like Sweeney's going the other way, prioritizing defense over the wingers. So in that world, I look at like, okay, I'm still getting Lindholm again. Like, I have my reservations. I don't know if he's truly like an elite number one, but he's probably the best that's out there that you can realistically get. So get him. Zadorov, I like. So do that if you are going for a defenseman. And then I look at like Anthony Duclair or Tyler Bertuzzi as the forward.
I was going to bring up Bertuzzi before we signed off because I just think it's funny that
I think those are solid options that might make sense financially and kind of like that. I'm going to call it like the third tier of free agent wingers.
I have another name real quick. So Bridget, you're absolutely right. Like, just to clarify, when I say three names, they're not going to get three big names, right? I think, and I tweeted this out. I think it's totally realistic for the Bruins to go out based on everything I've read about what I think their strategy is, what I think they need. Lindholm, Zadorov, and then like an Anthony Duclair, somebody who you can plug into your middle six, but can has that speed that they're looking for. It'll be affordable. But guys, here's a name, and I'm also looking for. So you could go out there, get Lindholm, Zadorov, and Duclair or something like that. How about the Sabres buying out Jeff Skinner, who has 191 points in his last 233 games, which is the last 3 seasons he's played. They buy him out. Scott or Bridget, can you explain to me? Okay, so is that literally as simply as the Bruins can take him on, sign him while Buffalo signs his checks? What is, or do the Bruins have to sign him to his own deal? How does that work if the Bruins were to go after him? And would you consider just him? You said you need offense on the wing. I mean, is he bringing you a lot of defense? No, but clearly he can add offense to a team. And is this a cheap way to do it?
Yeah, so contractually, the way it works is he's a free agent now. He doesn't have a contract, so it's brand new signing, new contract. The most recent example of that was Matt Duchene last year. Yeah, look, I'm not totally opposed to it. If the price is I don't absolutely love Jeff Skinner's game, but if it comes at a reasonable price. Sure. I mean, he can put up points. There's no question about that. Like, he has a good shot. He can finish. So, yeah, he would help.
And I know he seems like somebody that's easy to get along with, like good for the locker room based off his podcast and just things I see, like in his interactions with everyone. Seems like he would be welcome to, a welcomed addition to a locker room. He's a veteran now. Kind of makes me feel old because I remember when he was first in the league, but he's in his 30s now.
Yeah, but just like, instead of going after like a Marchessault or a Gensel, right? Like that. Well, Gensel is like the top of the charts for the wingers, but like instead of going after Lindholm and Zadorov and then not being able to get one of those top wingers, maybe you do like a Lindholm or Zadorov and then, like I said, like a Duclair who's not going to cost you much, and then Skinner who's like coming off of a buyout, and you could probably get him for, I'm not going to say league minimum, but you'd have to, because he's getting paid by Buffalo, so I don't think he would bend the Bruins over necessarily. He can't. I mean, the Bruins.
No,
would be like,
but like it's still going to be like at least $4 to $5 million, if not more.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I wasn't sure exactly how it worked.
So. I mean, I'm just guessing, but
yeah, I wasn't sure how it worked when somebody buys you out. Like what the team that ends up taking him on, like how that next contract looks, right? It's like, the player has no leverage? So you know what I mean? I wasn't sure how that looks.
Yeah, I mean,
he has the same leverage as any free agent.
Sure.
Yeah, and he's a power play guy. Like he can be on your power play. He had 8 power play goals this year. It's interesting. It's depending on the price. I always liked him as a player. I know, like you said, he's not fully a 200-foot player. Doesn't play defense as strongly, especially he's gotten a little slower. But I like him. I mean, he's a good scorer, like you said. So.
Well, guys,
I did think it was kind of weird that they bought him out, but I guess we don't really know what their cap, like what they're going for with their cap right now and whatnot. But
well, we have a lot of questions right now, not a lot of answers. Let's try to wrap this up so our listeners can hear this before it's outdated. This will be the most quick outdated podcast we will ever put out. We'll have about 20 hours of
I don't know, the Don Sweeney one, that was well, the one time where we
Bruce
recorded
Cassidy.
and then 5 minutes later, Cassidy gets fired and like that was that we had to we just re-recorded. We didn't even post that one.
That's true. That is true. I guess the last thing I'll mention, guys, Scott, you look like you're chomping at the bit to add something here.
No, I was just gonna say, hey, at least the draft stuff will hold up, so like people can listen to.
That's true.
Whatever we spend on that, like a half hour, that'll still be relevant.
I teased it a few minutes ago. But the Four Nations face-off, U.S., Canada, Finland, Sweden listed their first 6 players to their respective rosters. Brad Marchand was on Canada's top 6 or first 6. McAvoy was in the U.S.'s first 6. Just that kind of gets you excited, right? For that best on best tournament. Obviously, I think it would be nice to have more than just 4 teams involved. It's a very quick tournament, like we've talked about in the past. But I just think overall, you get the Olympics every 4 years. I think somehow, some way, in between those 4-year gaps, there should be a international tournament right in the middle to help get best on best hockey as much as we can. I think this Four Nations face-off hopefully is the first step in that direction.
Yeah, I'm excited, and no surprise.
And it'll be in Boston, like we said. Part of it.
Yeah, it's in Boston and Montreal, and in the final in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no surprise to see McAvoy and Marchand. I did see a couple fans who are like kind of odd that Marchand was in Canada's first 6 because realistically, like he's probably not one of the 6 best Canadian players right now. But it's like, but guys, it's in Boston, so like of course he's gonna get named. Like,
and he's a captain.
Yeah,
it's like.
Yeah, so
and they're going to be stacked. It's going to be ridiculous.
Every team is the first 6 names mentioned for Finland and Sweden as well. You were like, oh shit, this is gonna be a very elite tournament. I mean, obviously,
Canada,
right?
But Canada is always a tough one to beat in terms of depth and what.
Well, their defense, I think on defense after Makar, I think they drop off a bit compared to some of the other countries. But up front, obviously, they're pretty. It's insane.
I think
it's kind of crazy. We haven't had a chance to really see it in a while, right? Like some guys have aged. That last time they were playing, like Sidney Crosby, like last time they were playing, even Marchand, like it was so long ago that it's not going to look the same as it used to. This is our first real look at it in recent
almost
years.
A decade. Almost a decade.
It's been a really long time.
And before that, it was 4 years.
Way too long.
Or
way too long.
Yeah. All right. Bridget, Scott, thank you for your time this morning. I know you guys have to jump. Thanks to all the listeners. Hopefully you enjoyed draft coverage and buckle up because the next couple of days are going to be very fun, and I'm sure there'll be no shortage of rumors. So just stick to the NHL team accounts and the true reporters of the league, like the Elliot Freemans and whatnot, for your coverage, because they're the guys that they're getting texts. They're getting the texts right away from agents. Everything else is kind of just rumors. So,
and we haven't even touched on this, but like. We do have development camp this week as well, so I'll be there for that. So I'll have updates if people want to follow on Twitter.
When are we recording next? Because I feel like, me and Brian are going to be up in New Hampshire.
I mean, as far as free agency goes, we could talk about this offline. But I'm Monday afternoon. I'm good if we have to do one then. So yeah. All right.
Yeah. Well, as we said, like most of the Bruins free agency probably going to be done by Monday afternoon. Sweeney usually works fast. So yeah, hopefully, we'll have something up, by Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon. We'll see. But yeah, I think, they're going to have a lot of stuff done pretty quickly.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening and have a great rest of your work week. And we'll talk to you soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
not in front of a screen, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.